The estate of billionaire Henry Alden was a fortress, iron gates, camera-lined fences, and staff trained to follow orders without hesitation. But there was one resident even they feared, Titan, a massive German shepherd with eyes like storm clouds and a bark that rattled bones. He prowled the hallways with a soldier's precision, growling at anyone who dared get close. Trainers came from around the country, high-paid experts with treats, clickers, and firm voices. All left defeated. Titan was untouchable, loyal to no one, unbreakable. Until one gray afternoon, a black sedan pulled up the circular drive and a boy stepped out. 10 years old, hands in his pockets, quiet eyes surveying the mansion like it was made of glass. His name was Adam, Henry's grandson, though they'd never met before. The staff held their breath when he walked past Titan's line of sight. The dog stood, stiff and alert. No one moved. No one dared. But Adam didn't flinch. He simply looked at the beast and whispered, "Hey, buddy." And to the shock of everyone, Titan didn't growl. He didn't snarl. He walked forward, slowly, and sat. Henry Alden had everything, at least on paper. Fortune built from technology, influence earned through decades of deals, and an estate large enough to swallow half the town. But behind the marble pillars and vaulted ceilings, Henry lived like a man locked in glass, seen by all, touched by none. His wife, Eleanor, had passed 7 years prior, leaving behind silence and dust. His daughter, Claire, had grown distant, disapproving of the empire he'd built at the cost of presence. The mansion remained spotless, but the man inside grew more brittle with each passing year. After a well-publicized stalker incident 2 years ago, an obsessed ex-employee attempting to breach the estate, Henry's advisors insisted on heightened security. Cameras, motion sensors, private guards. But it was the final recommendation that arrived in a black SUV, muzzle on, eyes sharp, a retired K9, bred and trained for loyalty, precision, and protection. His name was Titan. Titan was unlike any dog Henry had known. No wagging tail. No sloppy licks. Just raw muscle and cool indifference. The handler who dropped him off gave a terse warning before leaving. He obeys basics. Do not push him. He doesn't like to be touched. That turned out to be an understatement. At first, Henry appreciated the dog's presence. Titan paced the halls like a silent warden, his claws clicking on marble floors, always alert. He obeyed sit, stay, come, but not with warmth, only obedience forged in tension. When staff entered a room, Titan watched them with unwavering suspicion. If anyone moved too fast, he'd growl, a low, rumbling warning from deep in his chest that sent even the bravest hearts racing. Within weeks, 2 maids quit. A third refused to enter any room the dog occupied. Even the head chef, who had served royalty, asked to be reassigned away from Titan's patrol routes. Henry, however, was different, perhaps because he didn't expect affection. He gave orders like he always had, with clarity, not kindness. And Titan responded. Not loyally, but reliably. Still, it gnawed at Henry late at night as he sat in his dimly lit study, drink in hand, watching the dog curl in the corner like a shadow with a pulse. There was no joy in the creature. No comfort. Only purpose. He tried trainers, 6 of them, flown in from different states, each one promising breakthroughs. They brought chew toys, clickers, agility courses. One spoke in gentle tones, another in military commands. Each left within a week, citing unusual behavioral resistance or simply shaking their heads. One trainer, a woman with 20 years' experience in handling aggressive rescue dogs, left in tears. "That dog," she whispered before climbing into her car, "doesn't need training. He needs healing." Henry scoffed at first. Healing? Dogs didn't need therapy. They needed discipline, structure. But the words lingered. He began observing Titan more closely. The way his ears twitched at certain sounds, like helicopter blades or the crumple of plastic. The way he avoided mirrors. The way he flinched when a drawer slammed too hard. There were scars under the thick coat, faded but present, on his belly, near the flank, and just under one eye. Whoever had trained Titan had done so in fire, not love. Yet somehow, Henry couldn't let him go. He told himself it was practicality. Titan kept the estate safe, his presence alone enough to deter any threat. But the truth crept in slowly. In the evenings, when the staff left and the halls grew still, Titan didn't retreat to a kennel. He stayed close. Not out of affection, at least not the kind Henry was used to. But the dog lingered, near his chair, outside his door, like a ghost keeping watch over another ghost. Henry began speaking to him, not commands, but confessions. He talked about Eleanor, about Claire, about how he hadn't meant to push everyone away. He never expected a response. But sometimes, when the words turned heavy and quiet, Titan would lift his head. Not to lick, not to nuzzle, just to look, as if to say, "I'm here. I don't understand you, but I know what pain smells like." It wasn't companionship. Not yet. But it was something. Still, Henry couldn't ignore the tension in the household. The staff moved like shadows, skirting rooms they used to walk through freely. Guests declined visits. The dog was becoming a problem. "Maybe it's time to send him back," his assistant murmured one afternoon, watching Titan stalk the garden wall like a silent sentinel. "You've tried, but he's not made for peace." Henry nodded absently but didn't respond. That night, he poured a second glass of scotch and set it on the floor beside his chair. Titan sniffed it, then sat beside it, silent, unmoved. "You and me both, huh?" Henry said softly, staring into the fire. And in the crackle of flames and quiet of the night, man and beast sat shoulder to shoulder, not in comfort, but in understanding. Each morning, as the estate's long shadows stretched over dew-covered lawns, Adam rose before the staff even stirred. The boy didn't need an alarm. Something unspoken pulled him from sleep. Maybe it was the quiet breathing at the foot of his bed, or maybe it was the silent connection that had formed between him and the one creature in the house that felt as lost as he did. Titan was always waiting, sitting tall by the bedroom door, not barking, not nudging, just there, like he knew his job had quietly shifted. No longer a guard for the billionaire who owned him, but a protector of the boy who saw through him. Adam didn't talk much. His mother had warned Henry of that the night they arrived. "He's gentle," she had said carefully, her eyes drifting to the hallway. "But he doesn't do well with noise or strangers." After the fire, he just shut down. And yet, here he was, walking barefoot through the garden stones with Titan at his side like it was the most natural thing in the world. He didn't tell the dog what to do. He didn't command, bribe, or correct. He just existed beside him, quietly. Sometimes he hummed. Sometimes he spoke so softly that even the wind had to lean in to hear. And somehow, that was enough. Titan listened, not like a trained animal, but like a broken soul recognizing another. On the second day, Adam sat cross-legged in the grass and held out a palm filled with sliced apples. Titan, who had snapped at trainers with meat-stained gloves, leaned forward slowly and took the fruit with such care it made Henry, watching from his study window, lower his whiskey mid-sip. By the third day, the boy was brushing Titan's fur with an old comb they found in the storage closet. By the fifth, Titan was lying beside Adam while he drew in the sun, both of them dozing between pages. Henry didn't know what disturbed him more, the way Titan had transformed or the strange envy rising in his own chest. He had paid thousands to tame that dog, flown in behaviorists, consulted animal psychologists. None of them had done what this boy did in 5 days. No tools, no degrees, just presence. And somehow it stung. That afternoon, Henry found them beneath the old maple. Titan was lying on his back, legs in the air, completely at peace. Adam was giggling, a soft, rare sound, as he traced a stick in the dirt. Henry watched them from a distance, his steps hesitant. It had been years since the mansion had felt like a home, since it echoed with anything other than footsteps and silence. Now, in a corner of the yard, there was joy. Tentative but real. Later that evening, Henry approached Adam while he was feeding Titan dinner by hand, one kibble at a time. He crouched beside the boy and tried to sound casual. "You like dogs?" Adam nodded. "They like you too, it seems." The boy didn't answer, just scratched behind Titan's ear in that perfect rhythm he had learned without instruction. Henry waited for more but got only silence. He stood slowly. "He was never like this with anyone," he murmured. "Not even me." Adam finally looked up. "He wasn't ready," he said simply, as if it explained everything. Henry didn't sleep well that night. Something about that sentence echoed in his chest. In the following days, their routine solidified. Adam would rise early, take Titan on long, wordless walks around the property, then sit with him in the garden while drawing or reading aloud from books he pulled from the study. At mealtime, Titan no longer waited by the kitchen door. He sat beside Adam's chair, watching over him like a sentinel. He was still alert, still the massive, intimidating creature bred for protection, but something in his posture had shifted. There was trust now. Softness. Not submission, but peace. Henry tried joining them once. He brought Titan a new toy from the city, a thick rubber bone. When he held it out, Titan ignored him completely. But when Adam took it gently and offered it, the dog wagged his tail. A single wag. Henry smiled bitterly and said nothing. That night, as Henry passed by Adam's room, he paused at the doorway. The boy had fallen asleep mid-sentence, a book open on his chest. Titan lay curled tightly at the foot of the bed. When Henry stepped closer to adjust the blanket, Titan's head lifted, not to growl, not to warn, but to watch. The dog's eyes followed him as he gently tucked the blanket under Adam's chin. For a brief second, Henry thought the animal might even understand. He looked into those dark eyes and whispered, "Thank you." Titan blinked once, then rested his head again. In that moment, standing in the soft glow of a child's lamp, Henry Alden realized something he hadn't dared admit in years. It wasn't the dog that had been wounded, it was all of them. Titan had been angry, guarded, scarred. But so had Adam. So had Claire. And so had he. They were all wearing armor in different shapes. And somehow, without ever raising his voice or trying to fix anything, that quiet boy had begun to take it all off. In the days that followed their first meeting, something changed on the Alden estate, quietly, like the soft shift in air before a coming storm. Adam, once just a guest for the weekend, became a familiar presence, his small shoes echoing softly through grand hallways that hadn't known laughter in years. He didn't speak much, but he was present, there in the garden before breakfast, walking slowly down the gravel paths with Titan close by his side. The boy's visit stretched from hours to whole days, and neither the staff nor Henry questioned it. Something sacred was unfolding. Something that felt too fragile to interrupt. Titan, the untamable guardian who once growled at the brush of a coat sleeve or the clang of silverware, had transformed. But only around Adam. He trailed the boy like a shadow, never straying more than a few paces. At first, the staff watched in stunned silence as Adam hand-fed the dog from his palm, little bits of cooked chicken or apple slices, while whispering gentle words that only Titan could hear. The great beast would lower his massive head and take the offering with care, eyes soft, tail still, like a soldier receiving orders from a commander he actually respected. It wasn't obedience. It was trust. Henry observed from a distance. He often stood at the library window, book in hand, though he seldom turned the pages. Instead, his eyes followed the pair outside. He watched as Adam taught Titan simple gestures. No sharp commands, no leash, just a quiet rhythm of movement and tone. A raised hand meant sit. A slow circle meant lie down. A slight point led Titan to fetch a stick and return it with reverence. No treats. No force. Just presence. It was as if Adam wasn't training the dog at all, but rather remembering something they both already knew. And then it happened. One evening just before dusk, Henry caught it with his own eyes. Adam reached out, slowly, and placed a hand on Titan's broad head. Not just a graze, not a careful pat, but a long, affectionate stroke down the dog's back. Titan didn't flinch. He didn't stiffen. He leaned into it, closed his eyes, exhaled, and in that single moment, something inside Henry cracked. It wasn't resentment. It wasn't even confusion. It was awe. And somewhere deep beneath that, envy. Titan had never allowed Henry to touch him like that. Not once. Not in 2 years of shared space, cautious feeding, and failed bonding attempts. The closest Henry ever came was a side glance of acknowledgement when placing a meal down. But this boy had been here barely a week, and Titan followed him like they were made of the same soul. Henry couldn't stop thinking about it. The way Adam would whisper, "Good boy," like it was a promise, not praise. The way Titan wagged his tail, not wildly, just 1 or 2 slow sweeps like a heartbeat, every time the boy appeared. Henry hadn't seen the dog wag his tail since the day he arrived. Even Claire was stunned. She didn't interfere. She didn't try to insert herself into the bond. She just watched, quietly, her arms often folded across her chest like she was holding back tears. In the afternoons, Adam began drawing again. He'd stopped for nearly a year, Claire had mentioned, ever since the fire that took his father. But now, Henry would find him on the sunlit patio, sketchbook open, pencils scattered, and Titan sprawled beside him like a living sculpture. Henry once approached quietly and glanced over Adam's shoulder. The drawing wasn't perfect, childish in its proportions, but it captured Titan's eyes in a way that stilled Henry's breath. It was all there, the sorrow, the strength, the silent loyalty. Adam looked up then and their eyes met. No words were exchanged. But Henry nodded, and Adam smiled, small, fleeting but real. That night, Henry poured himself a scotch and sat by the fireplace. Titan lay at Adam's feet, and the boy was reading aloud from an old copy of Call of the Wild. His voice was soft, a little uneven, but filled with intention. The room felt warmer than it had in years. The fire cracked gently. The dog listened, ears twitching at certain phrases. Henry watched the flickering shadows dance across the walls and realized he didn't feel quite so alone anymore. And yet, jealousy still lingered. Not the bitter kind. This was quieter, like watching someone else unlock a door you'd spent years trying to force open. He wanted to ask the boy how he did it. What made him different? Why Titan, a dog scarred by some invisible history, had chosen him. But he knew the answer wasn't one that could be spoken. It was something about Adam's silence, his patience, his understanding of pain without needing to name it. It was grief recognizing grief. A broken heart sensing another. Titan saw in Adam not a master, but a mirror. By the end of the week, Henry found himself lingering at Adam's side longer. Not to interfere, just to be near whatever healing was taking place. One evening, as the sun dipped below the hills and bathed the estate in gold, Adam stood beside Henry on the back porch. Titan sat between them, his head brushing both their legs. "He wasn't bad," Adam said suddenly. Henry glanced down. "What?" "Titan. He wasn't a bad dog," Adam repeated. "He was just waiting for someone to understand him." Henry looked at the boy. He didn't know what to say. He simply reached out, placed a tentative hand on Titan's back, and for the first time ever, the dog didn't pull away. In that moment, Henry understood. Titan hadn't been tamed. He had been reached. And Adam, without meaning to, had reached something in Henry too. It happened one afternoon as the wind carried the scent of fresh rain through the garden hedges. Adam was brushing Titan's coat gently, his small hands slow and thoughtful, when his fingers caught on something beneath the fur just behind Titan's shoulder. The boy paused, brushing the strands apart, and there, faint but undeniable, was a jagged scar. It wasn't recent. The skin had healed over long ago, but its shape was raw, almost violent, like something had torn through flesh with neither care nor mercy. Adam's hand hovered above it, then slowly touched the mark with the kind of reverence usually reserved for sacred things. Titan didn't flinch. He simply turned his head and looked at Adam, eyes dark and knowing, as if some silent truth had just passed between them. Later that evening, Adam found Henry in the study, leafing through old estate documents he pretended to care about. The boy sat quietly in the armchair across from him, hands folded in his lap, his expression thoughtful but burdened. After a long pause, he asked softly, "Where did Titan come from?" Henry looked up, startled by the question, not because he didn't have an answer, but because of the weight behind it. The boy wasn't making small talk. He was digging for something deeper. Henry exhaled, setting the papers aside. "He was part of a private military auction," he said finally. "After a security threat a few years back, my team insisted I bring in protection. Titan was on the list. A highly trained asset, they said. Good bloodline. Obedient. Loyal. Expensive." He paused, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. But the day he arrived, it was clear something was broken. He didn't respond to commands. Didn't trust anyone. Didn't even bark, just growled. Always on edge. The file didn't say much. Just that he was a surplus from a special assignment program that got shut down. No history. No handlers. Just a tag with a number and a warning, not suitable for family environments. Adam didn't speak. He only nodded, like a piece of the puzzle had just clicked into place. Later that night, after everyone had gone to bed, he sat on the floor of his room with Titan beside him. The boy traced the scar again, whispering words no one else could hear, gentle, soft syllables filled with the kind of understanding only someone who carried scars of their own could offer. Titan's breathing slowed. His eyes softened. He leaned into Adam's lap and exhaled a long, weary sigh, as if something he'd been holding for years had just begun to loosen its grip. That night, Titan dreamed. He whimpered in his sleep, paws twitching, breath irregular. Adam stayed awake beside him, gently placing a hand on his side every time the tremors started. And in the silent hours before dawn, memories flooded through the dog's mind, memories he couldn't describe, but that lived in his bones. Metal cages, cold floors, voices shouting commands he didn't understand, explosions ripping through air, the scent of gunpowder and blood. He remembered darkness, then light, then silence, and then nothing until the boy. The next morning, Henry noticed something different. Titan stayed closer to Adam than usual, not just as a guardian, but as something softer, as if some invisible thread had stitched them tighter overnight. The dog walked more calmly, ate more slowly. And when the cook accidentally dropped a pan in the kitchen, the metallic clang that used to send Titan into a defensive stance only made him lift his head and blink before returning to his place beside Adam. Henry watched all of it quietly. Over lunch, he leaned toward Claire and said under his breath, "He's healing, isn't he?" Claire looked toward the boy and the dog on the porch. Adam was reading aloud, his hand resting on Titan's back. "They both are," she said. Later that day, Adam asked Henry if they had any records, anything, even a box, from when Titan was brought home. Henry hesitated, then led the boy down to a rarely used wing of the mansion. In a locked cabinet behind old files and spare keys, he found the original delivery crate and the collar Titan arrived in. It was old, scuffed, the nameplate half-rusted. But behind the buckle, scratched faintly into the leather, were the letters K9X93. No name, no history, just a number. Adam held the collar in his hands like it was a relic. That night, Adam sat cross-legged in his room, the collar beside him, his sketchbook open again. He drew slowly, carefully, his pencil dark and deliberate. He drew the scar, the eyes, the stance of a soldier who never chose to fight. Titan lay beside him as always, but tonight the dog didn't just sleep. He rested. The restless twitching was gone. No nightmares. Just the quiet breath of a creature finally starting to feel safe. And in the quiet glow of the room, with rain pattering gently on the windows, Henry stood in the hallway watching it all. The boy, the dog, the bond that defied everything logic or money could explain. Titan hadn't been saved by training or threats or resources. He had been saved by patience, by kindness, by a boy who saw a scar and chose to stay. The sun was just beginning to dip beneath the tree line when Claire found her father standing alone on the back terrace, hands in his pockets, his gaze fixed on Adam and Titan in the yard below. The boy was tossing soft rubber rings toward the grass, and Titan, calmer now, almost graceful, retrieved them without hesitation, always returning them gently to the boy's feet. There was something tender about the moment, something raw and real, and Henry couldn't look away. Claire stood beside him in silence, letting the wind say what they couldn't. Then, without turning to face him, she said quietly, "You don't know the whole story, do you?" Henry's brow furrowed. "About the dog?" "No," she said softly. "About the boy." He didn't respond. Just waited. Claire exhaled as if bracing herself, her eyes tracking her son as he knelt beside Titan and whispered something into the dog's ear. "When Adam was 5, there was a fire," she began, "at the old apartment. It started in the wiring, we were told later, but it spread fast. Too fast. Left his father, he went back in. He thought Adam was still inside. But he wasn't. I'd already gotten him out." Her voice cracked, but she pressed on. "Mark never made it out." Henry's chest tightened. He looked down, suddenly noticing how small Adam looked in the vastness of the lawn, and how much quieter everything felt now that he knew the weight the boy carried. "After that," Claire continued, her voice steady but distant, "Adam didn't speak. Not a word. For 11 months. We tried everything, doctors, therapists, school counselors. Nothing helped. He'd just sit, but draw sometimes. But mostly he was just gone. Like he'd locked himself away." Henry nodded slowly, unable to summon words of comfort. "He wasn't good at those. But animals," she said, a hint of warmth flickering in her voice. "He always trusted animals. Birds, squirrels, the neighbor's old Labrador. It was like he saw them the way they saw him, without questions or expectations. Just presence. That's why I brought him here," she admitted. "I thought the change of scenery might help. I didn't expect this." She gestured toward the pair in the yard. Titan had laid down now, his head resting on Adam's lap. The boy absent-mindedly stroked his ears while humming some quiet, wandering melody. Henry swallowed hard. "He talks now." "Only when he wants to," Claire said. "Only when it matters." They stood in silence for a moment longer before Claire turned to go back inside. "You're seeing him now," she said gently. "Not the scared little boy he was, or the ghost he became. You're seeing my son." Henry didn't answer. He didn't have to. That night, as he lay in bed unable to sleep, Henry kept replaying the story in his mind. The fire, the silence, the lost father, and then, this unexpected healing. He had thought Titan was the broken one, the creature in need of rescue. But maybe it was more complicated than that. Maybe Titan had been sent to do the rescuing. The next morning, Henry watched as Adam entered the study, his steps light but purposeful. Titan followed, tail swaying gently. The boy paused beside Henry's chair, not fidgeting or avoiding eye contact this time. He simply looked up and said, "Can I have some of the leather from your workbench?" Henry blinked. "Leather?" "For Titan's new collar," Adam said. "His old one has a number. I want to give him a name." Henry felt something stir in his chest. A name. Not a label. Not a designation. A name meant belonging. "Of course," Henry said, standing. "Let's go pick the best piece." Together they walked to the workshop, Titan trailing behind them like a quiet guardian. Adam selected a strip of soft, worn leather, and Henry helped him cut it to size. With delicate fingers, the boy etched letters into the surface, each stroke slow, intentional. When he was done, he held it up. "Titan," it read. Just that. No numbers. No scars. Just the name of a dog who had survived more than most would ever know. Henry watched as Adam gently buckled the new collar around Titan's neck. The dog didn't resist. He simply sat still, eyes calm, body relaxed. And when the last notch was secured, Titan leaned forward and licked Adam's cheek. The boy smiled. Not a flicker. Not a shadow. A real, full smile that reached all the way to his eyes. In that moment, Henry didn't just see his grandson. He saw a survivor. A quiet warrior with a heart still learning how to beat again. And for the first time since Mark's funeral, the one he hadn't attended because of stubborn pride, Henry allowed himself to feel what he had kept buried for years, the ache of family lost and the fragile, beautiful hope of family restored. Something in the rhythm of life at the Alden estate shifted quietly over the next week. Not with fanfare, not with announcements, but with the slow, certain certainty of trust being built in the spaces between words. Adam and Titan began moving as though tethered by something deeper than leash or logic, like two souls that shared a silent language neither had to learn, because it had always been there, waiting. Adam didn't bark commands, didn't raise his voice or try to dominate the massive dog. Instead, he used gestures, soft flicks of his fingers, a glance of his eyes, a change in posture, and Titan responded with uncanny precision. A nod meant follow. A flat palm meant wait. A gentle tilt of the head meant lie down. It was quiet, seamless, and stunning to anyone who watched. The staff were the first to notice. Mrs. Keene, the longtime housekeeper, nearly dropped her tray of teacups the first time she saw Titan roll over at just a soft whistle from Adam's lips. The groundskeeper stood frozen one morning, rake in hand, as the dog and the boy danced around the garden in a slow, playful circle, Titan pouncing gently, paws light, tail wagging like he was 5 years younger. Laughter echoed across the yard, sharp and clean like a bell. It took a moment for them all to realize it was Adam, laughing, openly, freely, like the walls around him had finally cracked wide enough to let joy slip through. Titan became not just a protector, but a partner. When Adam walked, he walked. When Adam ran, he chased with controlled excitement, never straying too far. At night, Titan curled up beside the boy's bed, his body curled like a sentinel shield. No longer did he patrol the halls in restless silence. No longer did he growl at passing shadows. He slept, and in his sleep he sighed. Henry observed it all from the edges at first, like a man unsure if he belonged in the story unfolding before him. He found himself sitting by the patio more often, bringing out coffee he rarely finished, just to listen to the sound of Adam's voice drifting from the yard, quiet, sometimes almost a whisper, but there, alive. Titan would occasionally look Henry's way, then return his gaze to Adam, as if reminding him that the boy was safe, that he was home. And one afternoon, as Henry lingered too long on the stone steps watching the boy and the dog play with a knotted rope, Adam looked up and simply said, "Want to join us?" There was no hesitation in the question. No tension. Just an open door. Henry smiled, slow and uncertain, and stepped down onto the grass. Titan didn't growl, didn't flinch. Instead, he padded over, dropped the rope at Henry's feet, and waited. Henry bent down, carefully, still wary, and picked it up. Adam giggled. "He wants you to play tug," the boy said, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. And so Henry did. Not like a billionaire with a mansion behind him, not like a man whose life had been built on power and isolation, but like a grandfather learning how to laugh again. For a moment, the three of them existed in a world that didn't demand explanations, just presence. That evening, Henry joined Adam on the porch swing. The sky was painted in streaks of orange and violet. Titan lay across the wooden boards at their feet, head resting on his paws, his ears flicking at the sound of passing crickets. Adam leaned back against the armrest, his knees pulled to his chest, a comfortable quiet settling between them. "You know," Henry said, his voice low, almost reluctant, "I've never seen anyone get through to that dog. Not one trainer. Not one." He looked down. "But you didn't train him. You understood him." Adam shrugged. "I just listen," he said softly. "Sometimes people don't." Henry nodded, the words catching in his throat. He looked at the boy beside him, the grandson he'd kept at a distance for far too long, and realized that the quiet between them wasn't emptiness. It was a bridge. The next day, Henry surprised the staff by asking if the family dining room could be reopened. It hadn't been used in years, not since Claire's wedding rehearsal dinner. But that night, he sat at the head of the long oak table, Titan sprawled beneath, and watched as Claire brought in spaghetti and meatballs, the only thing Adam had requested. They ate together. They laughed. Titan snuck a few bites under the table and no one scolded him. And for the first time in a long time, Henry didn't feel like he was managing a household. He felt like he was part of a family. The estate had settled into something almost like peace. Each day followed a gentle rhythm now. Morning walks, quiet meals, afternoon training in the garden, evenings by the fireplace where Titan lay with his head against Adam's feet. The once intimidating dog had become a living reminder of how even the most damaged souls could learn to trust again. But peace has a way of stirring old echoes when you least expect it. And on a crisp autumn night, when the wind carried the scent of burnt leaves and something colder, Titan's bark shattered the stillness like a shot in the dark. It was close to midnight. Most of the estate was asleep, lights dimmed and gates locked. Henry had just poured himself a small glass of scotch when the first bark rang out, sharp, furious, deep from Titan's chest like it had been pulled from somewhere primal. Then came the second, then a growl low and sustained, shaking the floor beneath Henry's slippers. He stepped into the hallway to find Titan planted at the front door, muscles coiled, ears pinned back, the fur along his spine raised like knives. Adam was already up, his hand resting on Titan's back, not trying to hold him back, but staying connected. "Someone's out there," Adam said, his voice steady but tense. Henry didn't hesitate. He opened the command tablet near the door, tapped into the gate's security feed, and froze. A man stood just beyond the property line, partially obscured by shadows from the stone pillars. He wore a hood, his posture stiff, but the camera caught just enough of his face as he turned to look toward the estate before disappearing into the woods. It wasn't a simple trespasser. The man had come to be seen and to vanish. The next morning, Henry sat at the kitchen table reviewing the security footage again while Titan lay curled near the door, his eyes still sharp, ears on constant alert. Claire stood behind her father, arms folded tightly. "He knew the cameras were there," she said. "Look how he turns his face toward them. He wanted us to see him." Henry nodded. He tapped the screen and zoomed in on a frame that showed the man's partial profile, just enough detail to stir something uncomfortable. "And Titan knew him," Henry muttered. "That bark, it wasn't fear. It was recognition." Adam stood silently at the counter, stroking the new collar he'd made for Titan, the leather warm in his hands. "He didn't lunge," the boy said softly. "He just barked. He wanted to warn us." Henry didn't wait for guesses. By noon, he had his personal investigator, Marcus Quinn, sitting in the estate's study. Marcus had handled discrete matters for Henry for over a decade: sensitive mergers, hidden liabilities, background checks. But this was different. Henry didn't speak with his usual businesslike detachment. He simply handed over the footage and said, "I need to know who this man is. And more importantly, I need to know where Titan really came from." Marcus raised a brow. "You don't know." "Only what they let me read," Henry replied. "Military surplus, special auction, vague history. That dog had a life before he got here, and I think someone wants it buried." Marcus nodded and tucked the footage into his bag. "I'll get started tonight." For the next 2 days, tension returned to the estate like an old ghost. Titan became more alert, more protective. He rarely left Adam's side, even when the boy went to the bathroom. At night, he positioned himself by the window of Adam's room, eyes fixed on the horizon like a sentinel remembering his post from a forgotten battlefield. And though Adam didn't say it aloud, he knew. Something about that man had jolted a memory in Titan's bones. Something darker than training, older than commands. Trauma doesn't always fade. Sometimes it just sleeps. On the third morning, Marcus returned, files in hand and shadows under his eyes. He spread out documents across the study table, declassified reports, digital records, and one small, battered photograph. Henry stared at it. The picture was grainy, taken in what looked like a military kennel. A row of dogs in cages, their eyes dulled by fluorescent lights. In the far left cage, a dog with unmistakable eyes. Titan. He wasn't part of any standard unit, Marcus explained. This was a classified behavioral testing program, off the books, funded privately but used by the military. They tested for extreme aggression control, isolation adaptability, sensory response under duress. These dogs were raised in cages, trained with shock, desensitized with combat simulations, sometimes pitted against each other. Most of the dogs didn't make it, but the ones who survived, they were auctioned off quietly after the program was shut down. Henry's face darkened. How did he survive that? Marcus pointed to the name on one of the files. The man at the gate. His name is Keller, former handler in the program. After the shutdown, he vanished. But it looks like he kept tabs on the dogs that were sold. Most were never found again. Except one. Titan. Henry sat back in his chair, silent. Adam stood beside him, his hand already resting on Titan's back, his fingers moving in slow, soothing strokes. He came here to see if Titan was still working, the boy whispered. Henry looked at his grandson. No, he said firmly. He came to make sure he wasn't. The truth had weight, so much that it settled in the walls of the estate like dust, refusing to be ignored. Henry sat in his study long after Marcus had left, the dim glow of the desk lamp casting shadows over the worn documents now spread before him. There were no secrets left. The file made it clear. Titan was not just a retired working dog. He was a survivor of a covert behavioral experiment buried beneath layers of redacted memos and sealed records, a ghost of a program too brutal to be remembered but too dangerous to completely erase. They had called it Project Perseus, an illegal military operation aimed at building the perfect K-9 soldier through fear, pain, and absolute control. What they ended up with were ticking time bombs. Creatures too wounded to be trusted, too trained to be untrained. Titan had been caged, starved, conditioned through shock collars and sensory deprivation. When the facility was finally exposed and dismantled in a hush of political panic, the dogs were either destroyed or disappeared into the black market. Titan, by some miracle, or some twist of fate, had survived the purge and ended up at a government auction. No records, no warnings, just a file that read, male, German Shepherd, 6 years old, obedience, incomplete, temperament, unstable. And Henry had brought him home. He leaned back, rubbing his temples, the memory of Titan's earliest days in the house playing behind his eyes, how the dog had circled the hallways like a prisoner still waiting for a guard, how he had growled at door hinges creaking or flinched when drawers slammed. The trainers had written him off. Aggressive, they'd said. Too far gone. But Adam hadn't. The boy had seen something in those eyes. Not threat, not rage, but hurt. And now, the boy deserved to know. He found Adam later that evening curled in the library's window seat, a sketchbook in his lap and Titan's head resting in the crook of his arm. The fire flickered beside them, casting their shadows long and soft across the carpet. Henry hesitated in the doorway. Some truths were meant to be told carefully. Some were never meant to be told at all. But Adam looked up and spoke first. He's not just any dog, is he? Henry swallowed. No, he's not. Adam didn't cry, but his hands stopped moving. I heard you and Mr. Quinn talking, he said quietly. They hurt him. Yes, Henry admitted. They did. A long time ago. The boy turned toward Titan and traced the scar along his shoulder, the one they'd all noticed but never talked about. Why didn't they help him after? Henry sat down slowly in the chair beside them. Because to them, he wasn't someone to help. He was something to control. Adam looked down, his voice cracking just slightly. I thought I made him better. Henry reached over, resting a gentle hand on Adam's shoulder. You didn't fix him, Adam. The boy blinked, confused. You freed him. Titan stirred slightly at the sound of Henry's voice, his tail thumping once against the cushion. He wasn't tense. He wasn't afraid. He was safe. You gave him a home where he could be something more than what they made him into, Henry said. You showed him he was still good, still loved, that he didn't have to be their dog anymore. He could be yours. Silence hung for a long time between them. Adam looked back down at Titan, then closed his sketchbook and leaned into the dog's side, his cheek resting against thick fur. Titan let out a long breath, one of those deep, restful sighs that only comes when a creature knows it no longer has to fight to exist. Later that night, Henry stood alone in his study again, staring out at the moonlit garden. He thought about the war machine that had shaped Titan's past, the cruelty hidden behind patriotic speeches and covert missions. He thought about how many more creatures like Titan might still be out there, discarded, broken, and misunderstood. He thought about Adam, too, how the boy, in his quiet resilience, had done what grown men with power and funding and experts could not. He had listened. He had trusted. And in return, Titan had followed him not because he was commanded to, but because he wanted to. The next morning, Henry made a call. A private foundation he had once funded for animal rescue was still active, quietly helping rehabilitate dogs too damaged for public adoption. He offered to double their grant, on one condition: they start a new program, one named after a single survivor. Project Titan. When Adam came into the kitchen a few hours later, Henry was already waiting with breakfast on the table and a warm look in his eyes. He didn't mention the program. Not yet. But as Adam sat down, Titan at his side, Henry simply said, You gave him his future. Now let's help him keep it. The rain began just after nightfall, soft at first, then building into a steady rhythm against the windows. Henry had taken an overnight trip to New York for a board meeting, reluctantly leaving Adam and Titan in the care of his estate staff. He'd barely been gone 6 hours when the storm rolled in and the estate grew quiet, too quiet. Adam sat in the living room with a book resting on his lap, the television flickering muted cartoons in the background more for comfort than attention. Titan lay sprawled by the front door, his eyes open, ears twitching with every gust of wind that brushed against the house. The boy glanced toward him now and then, offering a silent check-in, the same way someone might glance toward a trusted older sibling. The dog didn't respond, just stayed still, alert, as though waiting for a signal only he could hear. At 9:37 p.m., the silence snapped. Titan shot up like a spring. His body tensed, nostrils flared, head tilted to the side. Then came the growl, low, thunderous, rising from deep within his chest like a warning that did not require translation. Adam froze, the book slipping from his hands. Titan was at the window in 2 strides, front paws up on the sill, eyes locked on the main gate. And then, the sound. Not the wind. Not the rain. A metallic click. The gate latch. Adam stood up slowly. He didn't call out. He didn't panic. He simply turned to Titan, who looked back at him with eyes full of meaning. Stay close. Stay calm. Let me handle this. The boy moved behind the large oak kitchen island while Titan stalked toward the hallway, his paws silent on the marble. The sound of a door creaking open somewhere in the back echoed faintly across the house. Someone was inside. The intruder didn't expect resistance. He was dressed in black, gloves on, face covered by a hood and mask. A flashlight beam danced along the hallway wall as he crept past the study, unaware that the house he thought was just filled with antiques and shadows was now occupied by something else. Something trained. Something awake. Titan watched from around the corner, his body crouched low, his breathing measured. He could have attacked. Any other dog might have. But this was not instinct. This was judgment. When the man turned the corner, flashlight swinging up, Titan was already there, silent, massive, blocking the path with eyes burning gold in the dark. The man froze. The light shook. A hiss of breath. Titan took one step forward and growled, deep and slow, like the sound of a mountain waking. The man tried to raise his flashlight, maybe to swing, maybe to run, but it didn't matter. Titan lunged, not with teeth, not with violence, but with the precision of training. He knocked the man off balance with his front paw, shoved him hard against the wall, and then stood there, teeth bared, barking in short, sharp bursts loud enough to wake the house. The staff came running. Lights flicked on. Sirens in the distance. The man tried to struggle once more, but Titan didn't move. Just held his position, growling every time the intruder even shifted. It wasn't aggression, it was restraint. It was a message. When Adam finally emerged from behind the island, shaking but unharmed, he ran directly to Titan. The dog immediately relaxed, stepping aside only when the security team stormed in and restrained the man. Adam buried his face in Titan's fur and whispered, "You knew. You protected me." The local police arrived within minutes. The break-in attempt had been professional but not flawless. The man had a record, linked to a string of private estate burglaries across the state. He'd likely thought the Alden estate would be easy pickings. He hadn't counted on Titan. By the time Henry returned the next morning, the story had already spread. Local news had caught wind of it, and the staff had no intention of keeping quiet. "Dog saves boy during attempted robbery," the headlines read. German Shepherd hailed as hero. When Henry stepped into the house and saw Adam curled on the couch with Titan's head in his lap, both of them asleep, he felt something twist tightly in his chest: pride, relief, love. Later that day, the police chief personally visited the estate to thank Titan. A reporter asked Henry how it felt to know his dog had saved his grandson's life. Henry looked down at Titan, then at Adam, and said quietly, "He didn't just save Adam. He showed us what loyalty looks like." They didn't frame a medal. They didn't hang up a photo. But in the main hallway of the house, a new collar was placed in a glass case. Not with gold. Just a leather band, worn and scratched. The nameplate read, "Titan, Protector, Survivor, Family." It happened 2 days after the break-in, just when the household had begun to breathe again. Titan, now hailed as a hero by local media, had returned to his calm watchfulness, always within arm's reach of Adam. The boy was lighter, more confident, his steps almost cheerful again, like the memory of fear had been gently replaced with pride. But peace, as they were learning, often invited its opposite. The black SUV arrived without warning, gliding through the estate's wrought iron gates with a precision that immediately set Titan on alert. He didn't bark, but he stood, tail stiff, head tilted as if the scent carried something sour. Henry was in his study when the knock came, measured, official, the kind that demanded attention. A tall man in a dark suit introduced himself with little warmth and even less delay. "Special Agent Malcolm Harris," he said, presenting a badge too polished to be from local law enforcement. "Department of Defense. May I come in?" Henry said nothing at first, just studied the man's face the way a seasoned investor might study a contract, looking not at the words, but at the weight behind them. Eventually, he stepped aside. The agent's tone was courteous but clinical, as if reciting a policy he'd repeated 100 times. "We've been made aware of your canine Titan," he said. "We have reason to believe he is one of several animals formerly assigned to Project Perseus, which, as you likely know, was terminated under controversial circumstances." Henry's jaw tightened. "I know exactly what it was. And I know Titan escaped it." Harris didn't flinch. "Which is precisely why we need to bring him in. For study. He's a unique case, resilient under trauma, responsive despite incomplete conditioning, and, frankly, surviving well beyond projected behavioral windows. There's a lot we can learn from him. His presence here, it's not ideal." "Not ideal?" Henry echoed, rising from his chair. "He saved my grandson's life. He sleeps at his feet every night. You want to take him back to be poked, drugged, observed behind glass. Harris remained calm. "We'll ensure he's well cared for. This isn't about punishment. It's about science, national security, long-term behavioral adaptation models. Your estate isn't equipped for." "This is his home," Henry interrupted, his voice cold now. "And I won't be handing him over." The conversation ended shortly after that. Harris left behind a folder, thin, clinical, full of terminology that stripped Titan of all he had become. Subject, specimen, case study. Henry shoved it into a drawer and locked it without reading further. But the damage had been done. Titan had known something was wrong. And Adam had been listening. That night, Henry found the boy sitting by the fireplace, his face pale, his hands clenched in Titan's fur like a lifeline. The dog didn't move. He simply stayed pressed against Adam's side, calm, protective, aware. "They want to take him," Adam said quietly without looking up. Henry knelt beside them. "They're not going to." "But they have papers. You said the government always gets what it wants." "Not this time." Adam finally met his eyes. There was no fear there now. Just pleading. "Please, don't let them take him. He's not just a dog. He's the only one who knows how I feel when I can't say it. He listens even when I don't talk. He understands me." Henry's throat tightened. He placed a hand gently on the boy's shoulder. "He's your best friend." Adam nodded. "And I'm his." There was no argument, no plan, just the quiet weight of resolve settling into Henry's bones. He had once commanded empires, manipulated markets, turned failing companies into global powerhouses. But none of it had ever felt as important as this moment, protecting a child's bond with a broken creature who had somehow made them both whole. The next morning, Henry called his legal team. No vague threats. No room for compromise. "We're preparing for a custody defense," he told them. "Yes," I said, "custody. He's family, not property. And I'm ready to fight this as long as it takes." They began assembling everything: veterinary records, video footage of Titan's behavior, psychological assessments proving emotional support status. Letters poured in from neighbors, from law enforcement, even from a child Titan had once quietly comforted during a visit to a local school. Everyone who had met the dog had seen it. He was no monster, no leftover tool from a failed experiment. He was healing. He was healed. Because of Adam. The court date wasn't set yet, but the storm had started to build. News outlets caught wind of the dispute. "Government wants war hero dog back." One headline read, "Boy's best friend caught in legal tug-of-war." Reporters began showing up at the gates. But inside the house, things remained as they always had: quiet, gentle, steady. Adam resumed his daily routines with Titan as though nothing had changed. He whispered to him while brushing his fur. They walked together through the garden in the early mornings. At night, Adam left the door to his room open wide, so Titan could choose where to sleep. He always chose the same spot, right beside the bed. And when Henry looked at them from across the room, he no longer saw a billionaire's estate or a troubled child or a rescued dog. He saw a family, a real one, forged not by blood or law, but by loyalty, understanding, and the silent kind of love that doesn't need words. They had drawn a line in the sand, and no agency, no acronym, no polished badge was going to cross it. The courtroom was colder than expected: polished wood, high ceilings, and a silence that pressed against the walls like a held breath. It wasn't packed, but there were enough people to make the air feel heavy. Reporters, a few curious townsfolk, attorneys in sharp suits, and a quiet boy gripping his grandfather's hand. Titan sat between them, tall and alert, his eyes scanning every movement with quiet intelligence. No leash, no muzzle, just presence. Calm and dignified, as if he knew that this place, this sterile, echoing space, was where his future would be decided. Judge Myra Hastings presided from the bench with the kind of composure only decades of navigating impossible cases could give. She had seen bitter divorces, corporate betrayals, custody battles torn apart by greed. But this was different. Before her sat not a wild animal, not a case number, but a living creature who had become the center of something deeply human: loyalty, loss, healing. A boy and his dog. The government's attorney spoke first, calm and calculated. He cited contracts, procedural history, military ownership rights. Titan, according to the letter of the law, was government property, once enrolled in a now-defunct classified program, and therefore subject to recovery and evaluation. This is not a punitive measure, the attorney emphasized. It is about public safety and scientific understanding. We have a duty to investigate. Then came Henry. He stood slowly, adjusting his tie not out of vanity but to steady his breath. And then, with his hands clasped behind his back, he spoke, not as a billionaire, not as a man of influence, but as a grandfather, as a witness to transformation. 12 months ago, he began, I was given a dog with no history and no heart left to offer. He would not eat from my hand. He growled at every shadow. The trainers said he was untrainable, dangerous, a liability. But then my grandson arrived, this quiet, grieving boy, and in a moment no one could explain, that dog laid down beside him as if he'd known him in another life. The courtroom didn't stir, but its silence changed. It softened. Henry gestured toward Titan. This dog has not just protected my grandson. He has become his anchor. He sleeps by his bed. He walks beside him without command. He lifts his head at every sound that unsettles the boy. He is not unstable. He is not broken. He is whole. Because of Adam. And because of what they've given each other. The judge watched closely, but still said nothing. Then Adam stepped forward. He was small in that room, even smaller standing next to the bench with Titan seated faithfully beside him. He didn't speak at first. He just looked at the judge, then at the government lawyer, and then down at Titan. Slowly, without a word, he held up a drawing, one he had made himself. It showed two figures sitting on a porch, one a boy with a cast shadow and sad eyes, the other a large dog curled around him, shielding him from a dark forest in the background. Above them were three simple words: he found me. There wasn't a sound in the courtroom. Adam bent down beside Titan and whispered something no one else could hear. The dog, alert and gentle, lifted one paw and placed it, softly, deliberately, onto Adam's lap. A collective breath rippled through the room. The defense called their final witness, Dr. Helena Vargas, a veterinary behavioral specialist with over 20 years of experience. She testified not with numbers or charts, but with conviction. I've observed this dog extensively, she said. He exhibits no signs of aggression, no triggers of panic or unpredictability. His bond with Adam is not only therapeutic, it's essential. Removing him now would not only risk emotional regression for the child but could reawaken the very trauma Titan has finally begun to overcome. She paused. In cases like this, science must bow to ethics. Titan is not a test subject. He is a being with memory, fear, healing, and trust. And trust, once earned like this, should never be broken. The judge leaned back. For a long time, she said nothing. Then, folding her hands, she addressed the court. In this courtroom, we often argue about ownership. Who owns what? Who deserves what? But today, we're faced with something rare, a question not of ownership, but of belonging. She looked down at Titan, who now rested with his chin on Adam's knee, calm as ever. This court finds that Titan is not a threat, nor is he the property of any agency who once used him and cast him aside. He is a protector, a companion, and yes, a survivor. Therefore, I rule that Titan shall remain in the custody of Henry and Adam Alden permanently. This case is closed. Adam turned slowly to Henry, eyes wide with disbelief. Henry nodded once, soft, firm, proud. The boy burst into a silent smile and wrapped his arms around Titan's neck. The dog responded by licking his cheek once, then settling his head into the boy's arms. And just like that, the room wasn't a courtroom anymore. It was home. The house didn't change overnight, but it changed all the same. Where once the halls had echoed with silence, now there were footsteps, small, hurried ones chasing after a German shepherd who no longer saw himself as a sentinel, but as a playmate. Laughter, once foreign to the estate, had become its most natural sound, floating through the gardens like birdsong. Henry Alden would often stand at the window of his study and watch, not with the distant gaze of a man who had spent a lifetime behind glass towers and quarterly earnings, but with the softened eyes of someone rediscovering what it meant to be alive. Adam ran barefoot through the grass now, wild curls bouncing as Titan padded beside him with that patient, protective stride. Sometimes they'd sit beneath the cherry tree for hours, Adam sketching quietly, Titan resting with his head on the boy's legs. The dog had grown gentler in every way, as if something within him had exhaled after years of holding its breath. No one dared call him a guard dog anymore. He was something deeper, something richer. He was family. Claire's decision to move abroad had come quietly, without conflict. She'd approached Henry one evening in the garden, her expression tired but resolved. "He needs a home that isn't in pieces," she said, watching her son chase butterflies while Titan kept a watchful eye. "And I need time to figure out who I am without all the wounds." Henry hadn't fought her. For the first time in their strained history, they'd agreed on something important. And after the paperwork was signed, and the final goodbyes exchanged with tearful hugs and lingering touches, Adam had stayed. Not as a guest, not as a visitor, but as a son. Henry officially adopted him on a bright Tuesday morning in spring. There were no photographers, no press, no ceremony beyond the quiet handshake with the clerk and a single signature that changed everything. When they returned home, Adam held the certificate like a sacred scroll. "Does this mean I get your last name now?" he'd asked, eyes wide with wonder. Henry had chuckled, ruffling his hair. "No," he said. "It means I get yours too." That evening, Titan sat between them on the porch, his head resting on Adam's lap as the sun dipped low over the treetops. The breeze was soft, scented with blooming jasmine and fresh-cut grass. Fireflies blinked into view, tiny lanterns marking the arrival of summer. Henry watched them in silence for a while, then reached out, his hand finding Titan's thick, scarred neck. "You didn't tame him," he murmured, voice low and full of awe. "You healed us both." Adam didn't reply. He didn't need to. He leaned his head against Henry's shoulder, and the three of them sat like that, man, boy, and dog, not as pieces of a broken past, but as parts of a newly forged whole. A family built not on blood, but on survival, forgiveness, and trust. And for the first time in a long, long while, the house on the hill wasn't just full. It was home. The years moved gently over the Alden estate, like sunlight slowly fading through lace curtains. Trees grew fuller, gardens wilder. The house remained as grand as ever, its stone pillars still regal against the sky, but inside, its soul had softened. The laughter that once echoed only from a child's mouth had matured into something steadier, deeper. Adam, no longer the shy boy who had whispered to a wounded dog, was now a calm young man whose voice carried warmth and quiet strength. His hands, once small and trembling, now guided others, both humans and animals, with the same patience he had once offered Titan. Adam had found his calling early. By the time he was 21, he was running a therapy dog program from the estate's southern wing, a space once filled with antiques and silence, now alive with wagging tails and gentle progress. Veterans with haunted eyes, children with shaken nerves, and elderly visitors searching for peace all came and went, each one welcomed by the warm presence of dogs trained not for obedience alone, but for connection. And at the center of it all, always watching, always near, was Titan. Time had touched the German shepherd, but it had not dimmed his spirit. His muzzle had grayed, his stride had slowed, and he slept more often than not. But when Adam walked into the room, Titan still lifted his head, tail thumping once in quiet recognition. He followed Adam everywhere, no longer as a shadow, but as a legacy, an elder statesman among younger paws, a teacher without words. The bond between them had never loosened. At night, despite his aching joints, Titan would pad across the hallway to Adam's room and settle beside the bed, letting out a long breath before resting his head against the floor. No matter where life had taken them, this had never changed. Titan still chose to sleep near the boy who had given him back his heart. Henry, older now with silver thinning at his temples, often watched them from the garden paths. He walked slower too, but there was ease in his steps and softness in his eyes. What had once been a fortress of stone and sorrow had become a home full of purpose. And Henry knew exactly where it had begun, with a growl that never came, with a boy's steady hand, with a dog's silent trust. To honor that beginning, Henry had something commissioned, something not grand, but eternal. In the center of the estate's main garden, where lavender bloomed and wind chimes danced in the breeze, they placed a small bronze statue. It was simple, a paw print cast from Titan's own. Below it, engraved into a smooth stone, were just 3 words: "He chose love." Visitors often stopped there, touched the paw, left a flower or two. Some cried. Others simply sat and stayed for a while. Titan, whenever they passed that way, would pause for a moment, sniffing the air, as if remembering something distant but dear. That evening, Adam sat on the porch where it had all begun. Titan lay beside him, his breathing slow and even, eyes half closed in the golden warmth of dusk. Fireflies blinked through the hedge line. A breeze rustled the leaves above. Adam leaned back, hands behind his head, and looked out over the world he now called his own, a world shaped not by wealth or fame, but by trust, pain, and healing. "You know," he said quietly, not even sure if Titan could still hear him clearly, "I think you were always waiting for me. Maybe I was waiting for you too." Titan didn't move, but his tail gave one soft thump. In the final narration, perhaps in the echo of Adam's voice or the quiet reflection of memory, came the last words that would carry through the estate for generations to come. "Some walls are broken by force, others by love in small hands." And with that, the screen would fade to black, not in grief, but in gratitude. Because some stories don't end. They simply settle into the soil and grow.